ready, Steven.
All right, hey, how's it going? My name's Steven. We're going to be going over Do You Even Lift for Children edition. So we're going to be doing a review of the studies of Fogmog and Meyer, Dab, and Mackenbridge. And essentially what they're going to be covering is it safe and effective for children to weight lift? And the second one, the Bob and Mackenbridge, is strength training good for children. So why is this important to TSA? Is it safe? What the recommendations are? And then we're going to be talking about programming for children. So why is it important to TSA? 85 to 90% of the personal training clients are kids. We also have the sports performance program, athletic development program, and just 50% of the clients here who work out here are youth athletes. So one of the things that has increased throughout the years is resistance training. So this is a quick little chart going through the years, starting in the 70s, going all the way up to 2004. And it's just showing the increase in weightlifting in high school. And one of the things to think about is once you're taught it, you pick up that skill, and as you start to come of age and you have kids, you start teaching that. And that's something we're going to go a little bit more into later. So, is a resistance training safe? So the three things we're going to look at is injury risk, growth plate injuries, and hormones. So injury risk. Right here's a nice little chart. This is a little bit older, but it shows some really interesting data. So they have multiple different samples, and it shows the injury incident per hour, per 100 hours. So you can see weightlifting for kids is kind of safe, really safe. You know, you have injury incidents, 14 to 19-year-olds for males out of 71 people, 0.29 per 100 hours of training. And it even goes out per year. So super low rates of injury. So this slide shows the difference in between injury in adults and children and kids. And one of the big things with children athletes and how they're getting hurt with resistance training, a lot of it is accidental. So that's going to be the biggest prevention, is teaching them how to safely move the weights and not to drop it on themselves. You can see a lot of injuries are coming from the feet and the hands. A lot of times it's just mishandling the weight. Now there have been kids who have been killed weightlifting, and that's come through not being supervised for one, and then also mishandling and improper use of the equipment, specifically the bench press. So the bench press is by far the most dangerous exercise that we have as weight training. And a lot of that comes from a few different things. One, it's an ego lift. Everyone wants to bench more. The second one is your grip. It's so comfortable not to grip that bar fully, so they have a suicide grip, or they measure the distance with their thumbs and they forget to wrap their thumbs around the bar. And what happens is they're already lifting heavy and they don't have a good grip. They let go of that bar and it hits their chest. And if they don't have someone there, the one kid who died in the studies, he dropped the bar himself, he wasn't able to get out. And then also the way the benches are set up, you have that very weak transition when you're going over your head, moving it over to where it's supported above your shoulders. And a lot of things bad happen, and you think the biggest weakness in the movement is right on top of your face. So that is not good. But, like I said, most of it in kids is accidental. So one of the big reasons you hear why kids can't lift is because it'll stunt their growth. And they say that because you'll have stress coming to this growth plate, and they're worried about growth plate fractures. And they're really worried about that because this right here is just so much weaker than the rest of the bone. But all the studies say it's not something to really worry about. You were seeing way more injuries in sports because you're seeing way more stress of the bones in sports, all the jumping they're doing, all the contact sports. So weightlifting, they're not really seeing any of these injuries. And in fact, we have this little blurb right here. Injury to the growth cartilage has not been reported in any youth resistance study. That is big. The next one we have is we have a lot of people who think resistance training is not effective because you don't have the hormones yet. You don't have the testosterone. Without the testosterone, you're not seeing the hypertrophy, the increase in muscle mass. Well, luckily we have other adaptations that we're trying to cause, and strength. Strength, we're not seeing those structural changes with the increase of muscle. We're seeing the neural adaptations. So I like to think of it as you're building a house, and when you're doing strength training, the adaptations you're causing is you're being more efficient with the electrical system in the house. You're having more wires, and the wires are going to be of better quality. And one thing that's really interesting is they saw an improvement of 30 to 50% in children in just 8 to 12 weeks in just a really good program. And another thing that's super cool, so before kids have those hormones hit, they're seeing that boys and girls are increasing at the same strength level, and then once those hormones hit, that's when you're starting to see that big difference. So I think that's super interesting when you have kids and you can have them lifting the same weights before the hormones hit. Fancy slide here. So when should resistance training for children occur? So the big thing here, because it is a complicated movement and most of the things are accidents, you want to start them essentially as soon as they're able to process commands. Training children is in some ways easier than training adults because they're better at mimicking. When you have older clients, they like to overthink movements. When you have kids, they see it and they're just really good at mimicking. You just want to really make sure that they are mature enough to follow commands. So programming for resistant kids, a lot of it is going to be focused on that proper technique, making sure they're learning the right gym etiquette. A big thing you want to make sure it's for strengthening the muscles. Like I said, you don't have the hormones yet, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense to program a really high volume because the muscles aren't going to grow yet. For your periodizations, you want to make sure that you are increasing it. This is a really good number, 5 to 10%, when the child can perform easy 15 reps. I think 15 reps starting out is pretty good. You are more in that muscle hypertrophy zone. But with kids, it gives them enough volume where they're actually really getting the movements down. So one thing I really saw was interesting was how fast the detraining happens. So even if they're playing sports, if they stop lifting weights, they stop strength training, 3% is lost per week. In 8 weeks, they're right back down to where they're at before they even started. So we want to make sure that it's constant. Some other things to really think about is how we're going to program, what exactly we're going to do. If we have a little kid, we can't use machines. Machines are designed for them. They're probably going to get hurt because of how the leverage and the torque is applied. So a lot of it is going to be free weights. And free weights, we can use a lot of different ways. We have banded exercises, we have dumbbells, we have the bars. And one other thing to really think about, a lot of people are very, very slow in how they program children and the exercises they use it. And they don't like to really get into Olympic lifts because it's a lot of torque, a lot of movement, very complicated movements. But the thing is, kids doing Olympic lifts are growing exponentially. So that's something we kind of briefly talked about before. We had that rise in CrossFit. The rise in CrossFit introduced a rise in Olympic lifting. The parents loved Olympic lifting, so they transitioned it to their kids, and their kids started super young. There's videos all over the internet of very young, like 10-year-old girls, and they're lifting an insane amount of weight, and they're doing it with perfect form. A lot of it has to do with the mimicry, because they have a really good coach that is prescribing it and being very careful for the weight selection. And that is all I have. So that's a quick down and dirty of resistance training for kids. So is there any questions?
Yeah, so you talked a lot about just kids being able to train at a certain age, and you said when they can start training is when they can listen to a command and be able to mimic something that your trainer is showing them. Mm-hmm. So is there a certain age, at least a range of ages that you found in your studies that is an optimal range for that?
So no, I didn't. I didn't find an optimum age. It's all going to be very independent on the child and their maturity level. That's really what's going to drive it. And then one of the things that it really takes a good coach. So the coach not only has to understand how to prescribe for children and how to explain all the movements, but they also have to understand as the kid's growing, their body shape's different, so they're going to have to learn how to program around their change of body shape and change the movements.
Right. Yeah. Because I took a lot of child psychology and just human and growth psychology classes in college, so learned a little bit about like what kids are able to do at different age groups, and like around middle age 6 to 12 is a time where kids may they will be able to listen to commands, and they've been in school for most of their life at that point, so they've listened to commands through teachers. So I mean, how much different is it when you're going to the weight room?
Yeah, so
if you have a mature kid, it's probably not too much different. So I agree with you.
A lot of the studies show it around 8, but there are some that do it even earlier than that. And honestly, it's better to get them in there earlier than later, especially with the childhood obesity rates we have here right now. So we can get them in there, and we can go ahead and start that love of fitness and that understanding of fitness. And also, if you have someone playing sports, we should get them in the gym even sooner, because a lot of the exercises can be geared for injury prevention. So if you have someone who's a thrower, we can go ahead and start strengthening all those shoulder muscles, and that's going to reduce the risk to have shoulder injuries. Same for sprinters and runners. We can go ahead and start strengthening their hamstrings and their lower legs, and it's going to reduce the risk for injuries. And also, we did talk a little bit about like the growth plate injuries, and that's not really a thing. And also what's going on, and we as exercise professionals, we talk a lot about older women exercising and weight training to increase their bone density. Well, the same thing's happening in children. So you are seeing that increase in bone density through resistance training.
Right, and I agree, like as far as like from a psychological standpoint, the earlier you get a kid accustomed to exercising, both mentally and physically, that they will be able to continue it. And if you're shedding positivity about exercising and strength and weight training at a young age, that's definitely going to stick psychologically.
Yeah, this is one
not only adolescents but adults.
This is one little tiny aspect. You have everything else you should be teaching them. You should be getting them out there plyometrics. You have that long-term athletic development, and like I said, this is one tiny little bit. Everything else, teaching them how to land, teaching them how to move, and overall, just keeping everything a good variety of everything. Because another reason why we're seeing a lot of injuries in kids is because they get so sports focused and very sports specific, and that really increases the rate of injuries and also increases the rates of dropouts. So that's why you want to keep everything as different out there as you can, and
have
a wide range of skills is what you're trying to teach kids.
Absolutely, yeah. I agree.
Thank you. Your choice of information, Dr. Fagenbaum. He was on a couple of advisory boards. He's the person for this.
And I saw a lot of his
Yep,
studies.
he's
really
phenomenal. And Dr. Meyer, I was fortunate to work with him at Cincinnati Children's Hospital on equipment for children. So, and it was specifically around growth plates.
Okay.
And what happens with growth plates as children lift, and what we can do. And we created some reverse cams in order to reduce the change of direction is what troubles the growth plate. It's not pressure, it's change of direction from concentric to eccentric, as it is with osteoporosis as well. That's where the breaks happen. So fabulous selection of material. Couple of questions for you. So I think we're talking about kids and fitness. Do you feel like in your chart you said that there's more children lifting now than ever before, and I agree with that. However, do you feel like we are PE gym class in schools right now? Unfortunately, the art teacher, the science teacher, whoever has a free period, that period is doing gym class, right? There's just not a lot of gym teachers left in the world. And as part of that, we've taken away some of the play. Instead, we've moved to Broward County, for example. Broward County, right here in Florida, they were the first ones to get wellness centers for middle school students. Wellness center, wellness centers for middle school students. And we moved them from basketball, from learning how to play tennis, from learning how to swing a golf club, things that we know are lifelong sport. And we've moved them to wellness, treadmills, bikes, lifting weights, machines, free weights, etc. In your opinion, in the kids that you've trained, and maybe people you've grown up with, do you feel like there is a lost opportunity for children not playing?
So this is a very interesting question. So last summer I read a book called Spark, and it was all about exercise and all its effect, and it was a great wide thing. And one of the things he talked about is how exercise is so good on the intellectual development and cognitive development of children. But like you're saying, I think you have to have a well balance. And the book is, I'm sure you're aware, one of the things the gym coach did was he did square dancing where the kids have that script. So they're working on social skills while they're getting all the benefits of exercise and the endorphins, so they're feeling good. So there is that hard balance you have to find.
Yeah.
So they are seeing that more exercise and structure like that, where you get a heart rate and the kids running. You are seeing more cognitive abilities enhancements, but you are losing some of those social skills maybe. And then also in that book Spark, they talk about those kids who are learning how to exercise. They're actually continue on and exercising more versus the kids who just played. So I think it's going to be very hard to find that balance of teaching the skills of exercise and then also have that play. I'm one of the big fans of having, exercise and training being separate. So if there's a good balance that they can find that at a school, or maybe have a school focus more on the training where they're getting those skills of learning how to be on the treadmill, how to work out, how to lift weights, and then have like an after school activity where they're getting that play. I think that would be a perfect balance if they could do that. But I think maybe just have it certain days, like, all right, we're gonna have skills, go in the wellness center, have that X amount, and then the other have that play where kids get to be kids and learn those social skills, because I think that's really essential that you learn that through play, those social skills.
Plus, what we see with like a lot of our athletes is they're here because they love sports so much. So if you take that playtime away, kids may not develop a love of sports, and maybe they like lifting, but a lot of the passion our kids see coming in here is because they want to get better at their sport.
Right. My fear is always, like, let's face it, not everyone is going to be an athlete, or even just coordinated. Like, I don't even need you to be an athlete. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And in observing, again, Broward County and other school districts, you can see the introverts it creates, where they're like, oh no, I can't do this. I need to go to the nurse. Yeah. And it's like and especially in what we found at Cincinnati Children's was anyone who was overweight, the idea of lifting weight where people could see them, it did not happen. They completely tuned out from it. They did not want to do it. It's very fascinating, like, right, the mind of a child, like, it's very fascinating.
I think it's hard to have exercise and fitness in those group settings.
Yeah.
One, I think you need more coach working on that individual level. When you have more kids, they're each unique and they're each going to have their own struggles. And one, you're not going to be there to really program and make sure they're safe. You're just going to be a general view. Yeah. And not everyone's going to like lifting weights, and you're going to be forcing kids to do something they don't like, and that's probably going to make them hate it even more. So I don't think there is a perfect answer. Yeah. But it's super interesting with all the questions that you're asking.
Did you come across the rate of overtraining in children? Not breaking bones, nothing like that, but how, again, the sort of this fantastical world that we create for someone to be a super athlete, which often morphs itself into body typing, which often morphs itself into bulimia and anorexia. Did you see any of that?
So with this specifically, I haven't looked in that. I have looked a little bit of like the injuries that happen when you get very sport specific, and then also the dropout rates. So they're saying that you want to play as many sports as you can until you're like a sophomore in college, and then that level is where you want to pick your one sport. So that's what they're seeing the best for injury prevention and staying with the sport going on. There's a lot of interesting things going on with all the bulimic and all that. There was that one Nike ad where the girl came out and was having a really hard time, being so low and
Yep.
all that. They did mention a few of these. So the second study where they're talking more specifically about strength training, having those conversations with the kids, talking about pads, talking about what your goals are, your nutrition. I think that kind of comes along having a smaller group and even that one-on-one where you're able to watch your athlete, your youth athlete.
Yeah, I mean, it seems unfair, like, right, in the world of weightlifting for the adult, like, we're gauging you on your body weight, how much weight you're lifting, right? And it just seems unfair to take that same algorithm and place it on an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old.
It is.
It's just unfair, and so perhaps you would come up with new algorithms for children to feel like they're successful.
So with kids, you just want to make them have fun. So like I see youth athletes as, one, let's make this fun and enjoyable, because I want them to teach them a skill that they're going to continue on the rest of their life.
Yep.
I really don't care too much about performance. If I ever teach kids, I want them to have that love. I want them to continue on. And then also, I think slowly progressing the weights, working on technique, and don't even care how much they lift. Just as long as they're progressing little by little, I think you're doing good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just going off of that, I was definitely wondering as far as like heavier lifts, when you talk about like larger squats or deadlift or a bench press. Is there a certain age where you think? Like a certain age where you think a kid could be able to do it, but maybe they're just scared of it psychologically, or do you think it's like, kids under 10 just shouldn't be doing that?
So a lot of that's going to be working with your athlete, and this study originally said that you shouldn't do like a 1 rep max test. You can do multiple repetitions, and then in later studies that Feinbach did, he actually did that. He did a 1 max test. But he said it's pretty much you have to have close supervision. You have to know your athlete. You got to make sure they have the form down. So again, it's going to knowing your athlete, knowing that they know the experience, and then also supervising them to make sure they're doing it right.
Right.
I think you train a kid kind of with the 1 rep max test because they are scary. You put them a lot of stress the same way you can do an adult. You just got to make sure that they're experienced and they know what they're doing.
Right, and as far as experience goes, I mean, you can practice, sitting on a bench and doing bench press with a free weight, which is not, as, it may not lead to as many injuries as maybe the bar does, but I still think it's what you're saying, a good way to train them to be able to eventually go to a bench press later down the road. Let's say they're 8 or 9 and they kind of understand it, but let's say they're just getting the form wrong, and it's a matter of you're positively reinforcing them to try and get their form right.
That's why you got to be a good coach to understand the
yeah.
progressions, because you can start them out doing bench, or I'm not bench, just doing push-ups, so they understand the movement. Then you can progress them to maybe doing banded push-ups, and then you can move them to maybe a floor bench next, where they're getting that weight, they're getting that comfortable with the weight. I personally like a barbell over free weights with dumbbells, because you have more stability with the barbell versus with the free weights. And you can start with a dowel or a PVC pipe, and then they have the lighter weight bars where you can get that filling and adjustment, and then you can just slowly get them to a normal bar.
Right. No. Yeah. I think I agree that I think it's completely possible, especially depending on you being a good coach and you knowing the relationship between you and your child and their progression. And I definitely agree. I think they could perform those type of lifts. But I just remember when I was 13 and just getting into weightlifting, I definitely not that I was necessarily scared of it, but there was definitely a psychological factor that went into those heavier lifts that kind of was wow, I really need to make sure this is perfect before I do it. And at that point, I didn't have one-on-one training. It was just we had one trainer in the gym of 40, 50 people. So I will say the supervision could have been better in my high school, but I don't know. Do you think that there's a certain ratio of coach to child when it comes to training that's optimal, or do you think that?
So the more coaches per athlete is going to be better, of course. I really think it's going to be down to the personality of the kids. Right. If you have kids who are really squared away and they're really attuned to what's going on, I think you're able to kind of step back and be more of a safety supervisor, especially if you already have a good programming and they already have the basics and the foundations down.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't think there's a good number. It's really going to be depending on who you're working with.
No, yeah, okay.
I think it's interesting now too, I mean, the technology. I mean, Dartfish used to be the only thing that was out there in order to see how an athlete was performing. But now, I mean, you have add-ons to your Olympic bars where it's velocity, it's doing the count, it's telling you how much weight, it's telling your eccentric, your concentric speeds. I mean, so this generation, if you will, the amount of data, that it's no longer just reinforcing and positive and in coaching anymore. And there's hard data now. Not to mention, you have an iPhone anytime you want to I mean, you can film yourself and play it back and throw it into a filter like a Dartfish or anything else where you know exactly where you are in space. And so I think that really helps on the coaching side to it. So when we talk about ratios of coaching, I don't think coaching is in the moment anymore. I think it's watching your own film afterwards.
Yeah, and that's definitely on the rise, especially with online coaching. Because why would you pay someone who's has a basic PT certification when you can pay some money and you can have one of the greatest lifters ever coach your lift?
Yeah.
All you do is just send them footage.
Yeah.
And then with all the apps, some of those apps are free now.
Absolutely,
Where they
yeah.
just track the bar. They see that the barbells essentially, and they're tracking all that.
That's right.
It's interesting how everything is just changing so fast.
Yeah. And what a great way to get a kid who is interested in technology and they think they're not interested in sport and lifting, and to kind of pull them in through this idea of here's a way to use technology. So I think it's a new horizon.
I would never even think about that.
Yeah.
That's a very great point.
I might cut that part out. Put us out of business.
Well, you just get it. It's like $300 for a bar. I don't even think it's that anymore. The technology, it's all over Europe. I mean, I think eGym makes it, Virtue Gym makes it. I mean, they're just they just screw right onto the end of the bar. That's super cool. And that's it. Like, it tracks everything. And then you put the app on your phone and it tracks everything.
Yeah, there's a lot of like super free apps or apps that are like a little less expensive. Huddle Technique is something I've used before. It's really nice. Just get that basic bar back. Like, all right, you got a straight bar.
Yes, the bar path tracker is beautiful. But I'll tell you though, when you come to adults, they're like, I don't want to hear about it. They're like, I deal with computers all day. I don't want to do it in the gym. So it's such a dichotomy of who you attract and who you totally turn off.
Yeah, and one thing that I've been looking more into on the Olympic weightlifting is like the Chinese method. They're getting those kids super young, and they're training them a lot. The amount of hours they're training these kids is insane. And it's interesting because I've kind of like done a little bit of like looking at fatigue and fatigue management, and then it kind of just destroys everything when you have someone in the gym working 2 different sessions, working at a very hard RPE for like 4 hours in the gym each session for 7 days a week, 6 days a week.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you also remember in many of those countries, like we don't do this here, thank God, they start with muscle biopsies. Like you're not getting in that gym without a muscle biopsy. And if your muscle biopsy isn't popping with the right type, you're not coming in the gym. So, I mean, they're filtering from genetics right from the beginning. I mean, China's famous for that. China, Germany, I mean, Bulgaria, certainly Russia. I mean, they've been doing that since the Iron Curtain. They've been doing that.
Wow. And then what's interesting is because the CrossFit we were talking about with the rise of Olympic lifting and the parents making that switch, they're getting the kids in there, and we're actually now being able to compete with them because we're having the younger kids in there learning how to be Olympic lift. So we went from like a lot of years we didn't even put anyone into those competitions, national competitions, and now we're actually winning again.
Yeah.
And it's all indirectly caused through CrossFit.
Yeah. Yeah, Thailand just dropped, they're going to drop $30 billion into a health and wellness initiative because they've been doing so bad in the Olympics. So they're going to drop this billions of dollars into just streamlining weightlifting so that it sparks people to want to be athletes. I'm talking about forward thinking. Can you imagine us trying to pass that bill through Congress? So I'd like $30 billion.
So that in like 35, 40 years we can win the Olympics.
Exactly. Can you imagine that conversation?
It's interesting to see the rise of resistance training and strength training. So with the baby boomers getting so old, there's doing a lot of research into anti-aging, and a lot of it has been focused on cardio, where they're making that switch slowly
Sure.
through strength training, and they're actually seeing the same improvements from strength training that they're seeing in cardio.
Yep. And the other part is, I know you touched on it, and I'm glad you stuck with it, the anti-inflammatory responses. I mean,
Right.
that coupled with the increase of strength training. I mean, that is the anti-aging, that fountain of youth, you know, the telomeres, keeping them healthy. Like, that's what people are trying to get after.
Yeah.
So, and of course, that's why recovery, like now you're seeing the pop-up recovery franchises. Regiminin just started one, right? The recoveries. So it's a franchise. So, and also we're seeing, right, because no one goes to tanning booths anymore, though that storefront is now converting into recovery zones. And so it's, whether it's, you know, the ultraviolet lights or the cryogenic chambers, like all of those. So now they're selling off their tanning beds for cryo chambers.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
I'd like to try that.
it's very interesting. It's cold.
How they're known for
Yeah,
it.
the recovery is like super interesting. I think it's going a lot of the way to kind of the online fitness, where you're getting a lot of fluff in there that's loosely on science. Yeah, one of the things I recently just watched someone break down, he's a PT for Juggernaut System. He's got a video just talking about foam rolling, and the science behind foam rolling was based on animal studies, where they're knocking the animals out, the rats out, and they're essentially scraping them with human-sized tools with human pressure. So in order to get that in the human world, you have to put thousands of pounds of pressure
So
onto
go roll your car
muscles.
over you.
Yeah, so like foam rolling really isn't doing
Yeah.
what everyone thinks it is,
Yeah.
at least not long term. You're seeing very, very
Yeah.
short.
Well, I like having the conversations with folks where they're like, yeah, I'm going to go do my recovery today. So what'd you work out this week? Oh, no, I don't work out. I just go to recovery.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I've done like a little bit of like looking up like what's the best way to recovery, and I don't think there's really a good answer. One, you shouldn't stop what you're doing. So
Right.
that's what you've seen a rise of like RPE-based training systems for strength training. And I think that's super interesting to see that. And you're seeing different ways. You've seen self-regulated. You're seeing that where they're doing a grip strength test,
Yep.
or they're doing it off their heart rate, or they're doing a broad jump or a vertical jump,
Yep.
and then they're prescribing the intensity or the reps based on their fatigue
Yep.
functional
Yep.
skills. I mean, that's one way to do it. And you have some people who are like, all right, instead of doing my main lifts, I'm just going to do accessories. So this way I'm still getting
Yep.
volume, but it's a lower intensity. So it's interesting.
Yeah, there's a program. It's out of Brooklyn Boulders. They have 4 facilities in the U.S. They're very high end. Dr. Paul Juris is the chief science officer there, and he does programming. So think about like, and it's not CrossFit, but I'll use that as the analogy. Think about during a CrossFit workout, he stops you, and he's taking 4 different variables to see if you're in overtraining, because overtraining happens in the moment, not after you're done. Like, it's in the moment, you need to stop it. And he does it with different lights. It's really interesting what they're doing up there and how they're recording it. It's Paul Juris, Brooklyn Boulders. You should check it out. It's and if you're up in Chicago or New York, go in and take one of the classes. It's really interesting what they do.
What are they doing with lights?
Yeah, he has a whole light. It has to do. It's tracking. It's not like Orange Theory where it's red light, green light with your heart rate. It's something a little bit different, and it's throughout the room. It's really fascinating. He's like in my top 5 of smartest people on the planet. He's unbelievable. He was the inventor of Cybex.
Okay.
Or one of the engineers, I should say, and he was the chief science officer for Cybex for a number of years. And it's like the brain just never turns off. I'm like, dude, take it down a notch.
That's funny.
Well, is there any other questions?